we'll get started here. This one's going to be a little bit less cohesive than the other, than the JavaScript one, I think. And the reason for that is because we have 20-ish minutes to teach you all of Python. Okay, so we'll see how it goes. Okay, I think I'm streaming. It's kind of, we have like a streamer, which makes it easier for us to stream, but then at the same time, I have to like start all the shows and everything like that, and remember to end them and all of that. Okay, cool. So let's get started. So I'm going to be starting with a template that gets given to us by Battlesnake for Python. And the reason for this is because there's a lot that happens that you don't necessarily need to know about. We will be talking about it in the next workshop, but we don't need to focus on it right away. And it's just in terms of backend sort of development, backend web servers, HTTP, stuff like that. So what I'll do, any links and stuff, just because I don't have them in the Notion document just yet, I'm going to toss them into, okay, where do we have Battlesnake? I'll toss them into general for now. So you can reference everything there. Okay. I'm also streaming on Discord from my laptop because, whatever, HDMI doesn't work, whatever. So I'm going to change it to light mode, which is kind of cringe, but I think it makes it easier for people to read in the back. So, oh yeah, there we go. I know, right? Beautiful. Okay. So this repository, it includes some sample code. Now, I don't really want to dive too deep into going through the entire workflow of like creating the bot. So instead, what we're going to mostly be focusing on here is more of like what I call code reading. And what I mean by this is we're going to take a look through the code that's there, talk our way through it, see where stuff happens, because I think that's a much better path to take rather than just trying to go from the ground up with a lot of ideas. So, and also that being said, if you haven't used GitHub before, don't worry about it so much. That's not the main focus of what we're doing here. All I need to do is go into the main.py file here to see everything. I'm going to make it a lot bigger so that we can go through it little bit by little bit. So we have a few different files, and I'll just point them out first, any ones that are important. Okay, so we have server.py and main.py. So these are the two most important things that we have. And we'll take a quick look through the server.py here, though it's not worth spending too much of our time on without getting lost in the details. And so essentially what the server is doing, so I might have described a little bit how Battlesnake runs, is that every about half a second, it's going to ask you what you want to make your next move to, or what you want your next move to be. And so in that time, you have either half a second or like 200 milliseconds, a short amount of time to understand what the game state is, so where all the snakes are on the board, and then make a decision about how you want your snakes to then move. So with the server, we can see some information, such as if you have a snake 24/6, if you don't know like web length and stuff, this isn't going to be a whole lot of nothing. But we can recognize things like we have like a GET request right here, a POST request. But let's not look at that just yet. Let's look at instead sort of where the logic is happening. So we can see, okay, there's something here that is going to care if an end happens. So maybe that's a game end, maybe that's a turn end. We don't really know that just yet. We also have something here for move, and so maybe that's what Battlesnake will ask us like when we want to make a move on our turn. Up here we have a start, so maybe this one's going to, Battlesnake's going to send some information to us about the start of the game or something. So essentially we have a few different, sort of like, they look like functions. We have different functions here that are going to do some different things. And then as I go down to the bottom, we have a lot of stuff. This is more just like generic template server code for what Python is doing in the background. But now that we've looked over this file a little bit, again, we're not looking too much for the intention here, just doing a little bit of a survey of what stuff is going on. Let's instead go take a look. I'm actually just going to open this up. So a little cool trick, if you hit period when you're on any GitHub repository, as long as you're logged into GitHub, then you'll load up the web browser here. Test. I don't know if that's any louder. Okay, so that's going. I'm going to go. Oh, it's still awake. Very cool. All right. So we'll take a little bit of a look through the code here. So again, this is a template file. They try to do their best to specify that you have like this big amount of documentation up here. You have some imports of stuff, but we're really going to start caring after all of this configuration code. And just to specify, this configuration is like saying stuff like, how are we, like, which version of Battlesnake are we trying to communicate with? and then who's the author of it, what color do we want to choose for our snake. So that's stuff that we don't need to worry about too much right now. But as we go down, we're going to start seeing stuff that we saw in the other server.py file. And so right here, we have something called start, and we have something called end. And so, well, in the documentation right here, it's going to say this function is going to be called when the start of the Battlesnake game begins. This function is going to be called when the end of the Battlesnake game begins. And so right now, it just has start and end, like printing stuff. The reason that there are functions there are maybe you want to go in and change out a little bit, like you start a new game, maybe you have to like clear your history and go and like know that it's like a new game that you're doing. Maybe you have to set some stuff up. Okay. So right here, this is where we're going to spend most of the time for the next, how much time do we have? Ooh, 15 minutes, all right. So this function is going to be where we decide every single turn what decision our snake makes. And so we can see, okay, like the documentation specifies it a little bit. Move is called every turn and returns your next move. And then also it tells us that valid moves are up, down, left, or right. So when we take a look at the demo of Battlesnake, I'm going to just make it, okay, well, sorry. Okay, whatever. So here on the right, we can see the snake moving around, and it's going pretty quickly, but we can see the turns happening. So every single time we see the snake move, that's considered one turn of the game. And at any point in the game, we can see a few different things. We can deduce that a snake must move. It can't just stay where it is. It has to go in some direction. And then further, we can also see that it's able to move up, down, left, and right. And so, okay, let's compare that to the code. That's a similar thing as what we're seeing over here. It's telling us that we can take we can say we want to go in any of these different directions. Now, one question I have that I will probably find out by the end here, but I'm thinking, okay, well, if I'm going up, I keep going up, 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 and I suddenly say to go down, I'm curious what the case that happens there is. So maybe we'll find out later, because effectively you'd be trying to do like a 180 turn onto yourself, and so we'll try to find that out by the end. Next up, we're going to be diving a little bit more into some Python constructs. And so right here, we have a Python dictionary. So in this case, the Python dictionary is really helpful because it allows us to track which directions we're allowed to move. And so right off the bat, we can see, okay, we have up, down, left, and right. And we're going to say that all of them are valid places to move. We don't have to worry too much just yet about which ones are unsafe, but just out of curiosity, why might we mark one of these as false? Does anybody have any ideas? Yeah, in the way.
Like maybe there's a snake to your right.
Okay, that's pretty good. And how about, is there another one everybody has? Yeah. Exactly. So maybe you're close to the boundary, and then I'm thinking a few other cases. Anybody just get Byron?
Run back on yourself.
That's another one. Yeah. So if you have like your body right there, you don't want to run back on yourself. And then maybe let's think of like a few moves into the future. Why might you want to call one move or one direction more unsafe than another? This is like more of a nebulous question. But any thoughts? No. Yes, and what? Yeah, so maybe we look to our left a little bit, we see that there's 5 spaces until the wall. Maybe we look to the right and see there's 1, or I guess 2 spaces or something. We can kind of start to deduce that one direction might be more beneficial than the other. So in this case right here, it's a Python dictionary. If you're used to like seeing it in different forms, you might recognize it like this, if it's cleaned up a little, like each one's on a different line, something like that. But it just tracks each of the directions, which one is safe. And so for right now, we're saying that they're all good. Now, it's, okay, so right here, it tells us that they've included code to prevent your Battlesnake from going backwards. Now, this is less about Python and more about Battlesnake, but we have some interesting thing that we're using to get information about the game. So let's take a look again at the move function. We're going to get some information. We're going to get a game state right here. And so this is something that's passed to the function, or it's passed to our Battlesnake server that we're running. And this comes directly from Battlesnake. And so inside of this, it's going to have a lot of data on how the game is working right now. I don't know if this page is going to load and tell me. Oh, cool, it does. So this is what we get sent. Oh, no. OK, so this is what we get sent every single frame, or every single turn. There's a whole bunch of information here that we don't necessarily need to care about, but once we look at this information down here, okay, so we find out which turn we're on. If we take a look at the board, it's going to tell us information about the height and width of the board, where there's food on the board, so which X and Y positions, where there are hazards, though I don't think we're playing with hazards, and where the other snakes are, as well as yourself. And so if we look here, okay, so snake, then it tells us there's a body at 3 different locations, and then some other information here. So let's go back and look at the code and see sort of how it's getting that information. So if we go to the game state, we're looking inside of this object. It is a JavaScript object. It gets loaded into Python as a Python dictionary. So first of all, it says you, then it says body, then it says 0. So body right there and 0. So let's try to figure out where that maps to. So if I go back over to JavaScript object, let's see. I'm looking for you. Okay, so this is the first part, you. And then we go into you, and then we go to body. And so body is right inside of here. And then we say 0. And so because this is an array in either JSON or in the Python representation of this, when we say 0, we're talking about the very first part of the body. And then as it specifies over here, this is the location of your head. And then similarly, if we look on the next line, we can see we have the game state of you, your body, and then 1. And so what's going on here is it's going exactly to that same place. However, it's asking for the next part of that array. And so if this is where the head of our body is, then this is where the next part of our body, or what it calls the neck, is. Okay, so I don't think I can pause this, but if you think about it, okay, we got the head, that's the first part of the snake, and that's the second part. We don't want them to run into each other. And so this entire section of code right here is going to do a check. It's going to say, now that we know the coordinates, the X and Y coordinates of both your head and your neck, we want to figure out which move is unsafe. And so we can say, okay, we can't move left if our neck X position is less than our head X position. I'm going to just write out a little bit here because this is a little bit weird to look at first. But let's say, for example, we have, I don't think I've Copilot, so it's not going to help me. But I'm just going to go like this. Draw a little bit of a map here. So if this right here is our snake head, and this is our neck, what this is saying is if my next X position, so if we look right here, okay, let's say this is like 0, 1, 2. If it's less than my head position, and so head position is so 0, 1, 2, 3. So in this case, this is true. Then we want to say, is move safe left? And we want to say that's false. So in this case right here, we've determined that if we were to take a left turn right here, or not a left turn, but if we were to go left on our turn, we would run into our body. And also, it's a pretty small map, and so it's not ideal. There we go. So each one of these is going to specify if the neck is left of the head, or if the neck is right of the head, then we can just set each of those to false. And so by the time we get down here, one of the directions is no longer safe. So we only have 3 different moves we can make now. Now it's going to go in and do a little bit of logic here. And so we're going to have 3 different to-dos. And so these are the to-dos that we've described already. We've described that we don't want to go out of bounds. We don't want to hit a wall. We've described that we don't want to collide with ourselves. We don't want to run into our neck or any other part of our body. And then we also don't want to run into any other Battlesnakes. And so once, okay, just like another theory question here, if we were to implement all of these to-dos and they were to work correctly, what might, what would some other concerns for a Battlesnake be? Like, would this run properly? What do people think about that? Yes.
If you're just setting all the different left, right, true, false, you end up setting all false. Yeah,
that is an issue, yes. So yeah, maybe you've determined, I found every single area beside you is not valid. Then what you'd probably do is your program would crash because it doesn't have something to do, or it would send something back to the server saying, I don't want to make a move, and then the server would say, you have to make a move, and it would kill your thing. So that's an interesting little one right there. I wasn't thinking that one, to be honest, but yeah, so that's pretty good. And any other thoughts on this, Byron? Oh yeah, that's another really good point, because one of the objectives of the game, as we saw before, was that our snake needs to go around and find food. If it doesn't find food for long enough, it's also going to die. And so, although this does implement some logic, it will keep your snake alive for a bit. And maybe your snake, while running around with these rules, it just determines something every single turn and goes in that direction. Maybe it will run across food. Maybe it will end up killing a snake that's significantly stronger than it, just out of luck. But this will prevent us from dying quite a lot. And so what I will say is that if we go through and we do the implementations here, you can compete against quite a few snakes and have a pretty good chance. I mean, even if it takes like 100 times, you can beat other snakes at this point. So now let's go down to the bottom here. I'm going to try to keep this one quite short and just like wrap up a few minutes before, just so we can move on to the next workshop. But now that we've determined, regardless of whether this is influenced, I'm just going to take this all over, pretend that we only care about where our neck is. We're going to have a certain amount of safe moves. And so, okay, so this is a little bit of an interesting construct where it's going to try and say, we're going to go and change from this dictionary up here, which I've changed out a little bit. So we're going to translate from this dictionary of trues and falses into something where it's just a Python list of which directions we can go. And so if we determine that left was not viable, then we want to say down here, we want to just get a list that ends up being right, well, string right, up, and down. So that's sort of what we want to translate it into. And then at that point, okay, right here, if there are no safe moves, as we described, then we don't have an option, we don't have something to pick, and then, okay, so then we're going to print out, there's no safe moves moving down, and then you'll die. So it is what it is, but this is like a helpful case so that your server doesn't crash. Otherwise, if we do have something we can move to, it's just going to choose a random one of them in this case. That's not necessarily ideal though, because later we might have some ideas on which one is better. Maybe we know that if we go up, we're going to have a higher chance of success than if we go right. So in that case, we probably want to, in the future, instead of just choosing a random one, we want to sort by which one's most viable. Okay, so, and then there's like another to-do step down here. So we're going to move towards food instead of random. And so in this case, this is sort of like what Byron was mentioning. Try to prioritize moving towards something else. And so similarly, let's just do a quick search here. Okay, game state, I'm going to go over to the example move here. It's looking for board, then food. So let's go up to here. Okay, we can see the board. Inside the board is food. Okay, cool. And we have some information on the food. All right. So with that, we've gotten to the end of the template. We've gotten to this area where we have like, we're importing the server, we're getting the server to run. This, again, this is just boilerplate. We're going to dive into it a little bit with the next talk a little bit about that. But all of what we need to mostly focus on is inside this function. This is where you're going to add your artificial intelligence to determine which directions you move. It's where you're able to use like, there's like some other cool ideas. So there's like this idea of heuristics, which is taking a look at each direction and having some way to decide which one is best. And so when we think of heuristics, we can often think of like maybe if you're playing chess, you want to figure out which piece you should move because of which one is likely to give you the most success in the future. So with that being said, we have just a few minutes left before we hop over to the next workshop. So I'm going to go over to StreamYard. This is the other one. Let me go back to busy. I'm just going to end my stream here. Python. Oh gosh, okay. Is this still streaming? Yeah, okay, cool. All right, so